Well, should we launch?
Sure.
Should we get going? All right. Well, if you're just joining us this morning, I'm Dennis Pierce with Keller Williams Realty and Rain City Digs. I also am the owner, moderator, founder of the Snoqualmie Valley Gardeners Exchange. And I have been introduced to a gentleman who you're going to soon know, Dave Hunter, who is, he actually is a world-renowned, I'm accurate on that, right? He's world-renowned expert on mason bees. And who, what he doesn't know, he has the sources to find because he's well connected in the world of mason bee knowledge, having connected with scientists who are studying mason bees and bee populations all around the world. So he's got a lot he can share with us today. There's a ton of learning to be done. And of course, as gardeners, we're all here to do whatever we can to improve both our gardens and the world around us. So I'm going to ask as we proceed, first of all, letting you know that everybody, we are recording this. And secondly, if you have questions, if you could please put them in the Q&A, and our moderators, Kim and Kylie, will take care of making sure that those questions are inserted at appropriate points in the conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and here we go. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. There are going to be a lot of pauses as we're putting slides together. You'll see a little question mark go up there. Kim's going to verbally say, hey, Dave, here's a couple of these questions, and I'll answer them, keep on going. So this is more, if we can help it, it's not a lecture, it's more of a discussion. So let me share my screen. And we're talking about just the gentle mason bees. Okay, move forward slides, there we go. In today's presentation, we're going to be talking about a little bit about us. We'll be talking about crown bees. The bee diversity, there's a lot of bees out there. Some basics on mason bees, how to raise these bees specifically for your backyards. And then crown bees is more than just selling things. We've got a lot of programs that we're really proud to be collaborating and touching for the world. So that's all covered there. This is Kim's joke. What did the bees say to the flower? Kim?
Hey, bud.
There you go. And with that, off we go. So crown bees, we are a bee-focused company, specifically cavity nesting, so hole nesting bees. Very much science-driven. We work with researchers across the world, trying to just ask questions and work with them on collaborating with them wherever we can. We also work with a lot of nonprofits, a lot of other organizations out there that what we learn, we share. What we learn from them, we share. I mean, it's awesome. We strongly believe in education. Everything on our website is as accurate as possible. We give this out in bee mail in every place we can. It's important for us that we have quality products. We want the bees to survive. And so everything we do is kind of nature-centric. We've analyzed the bee. How can that bee be successful more so than the easiness of human needs? We're also trying to keep our footprint small. We're slowly reducing any plastics we have, and we're trying to be good citizens of the world. And then very truly, we are customer-focused. Kylie runs our customer service piece, and we answer the phones. We try to help you be as successful as we can. So that's us. There's a lot of species of bees in the world. I think it's close between 20 to 24,000. We hear huge numbers out there, and those are the known species. So there's a lot of species we don't know about. Here in the US, there's about 4,000 species. And now, when we look at the species of bees, 10% are social, like a honeybee and a bumblebee. All the rest are solitary bee, where every female is a queen. And look at the sizes of bees. I mean, these are real life, obviously it's exaggerated on my screen, but There's some really, really, really small bees and some large bees. A little difference between the two of them, social versus solitary. So in a social, you've got one queen and one hive to defend. As a result, the honeybees will be aggressive. When you get close to a hive, they're there to protect their queen, their honey, and all of the eggs there. They're a wonderfully communicative insect. I think they're super evolved, and it's a fantastic study of how to collect the most amount of pollen and nectar and bring it back to the hive, how to survive through the winters. It's a wonderful bee, and in everything we do in my company, we don't try to disrespect the honeybee. We're just talking about a different bee. The ones we play with are solitary. Every female is a queen. And because she's just her, there's nothing to defend. You can put your hand over the holes. The bees kind of land on your hand. I mean, they're just a gentle, they don't need to sting. You can get stung if you grab one in your hand and squish it. Yeah, I mean, they'll let you know that they're here. And the female, she does all the chores herself. She's going to mate at the very beginning. And then she's gathering the pollen, laying the eggs, sealing those chambers. And she does it by herself. And when we say solitary, and you look at the nesting holes that we've got in these bee houses, the bees do want to nest to each other. So it's like a bunch of condo owners, if you can. Everyone owns their own nesting hole, but they want to be next to their tenants. So solitary bees, social bees, and even cool thing about honeybees, boy, when you get stung, they're releasing a pheromone that says, hey, you know, if you smell this pheromone, come out here quick and defend the hive. It's a different type of bee that we're talking about here. And we're looking at bee diversity. We strongly believe the more bees that you've got out there, the more diverse your pollination is going to be. Some bees only go to some types of flowers. Some bees are generalist. Researchers are now realizing that when you look at the trees of the world, the bushes of the world that need to, without trees being planted, you don't have habitat for deer. Without seeds going out in your meadows, you don't have quails aren't able to get their seeds, or the mice don't get their seeds. So these bees of the world are really doing much more than just talking about human crops. And even then, they're now realizing that even these human crops, the honeybee isn't the end-all bee. So they all have different needs, and they all play some important role in our ecosystem across the planet. So we're specifically talking today about mason bees. And when I say mason bees, I'm talking about 350 some species across the planet. We're really talking about Osmia lignaria, is the bee that's found in most states of the US. And then very similar to that, we'll find a lot of Osmia cornifrons. These were introduced to the US back in the 80s, and it's more of a brown mason bee. It's a wonderful species as well. We find it all across the country. So these two pieces, and you'll find, gosh, there's other ones. Here's Osmia californica we find in Washington State down through California. There's a lot of bees that nest in holes. Okay, so this little red piece down here is a question mark. If you have anything from the previous slides, go ahead and throw that into the Q&A. And then Kim, if you've got any.
We don't have any questions yet. You're just being so thorough.
So that's what that means. So yeah. Think as I'm talking, I'm going to be stopping occasionally in through here. As I'm talking, we'll stop. So put your questions there. We do want to answer them. So let's look a bit more into the bee. The blue orchard, this is Osmia lignaria. Kind of, it's a very goes from a greeny to black shell, very hairy all over their body. Their mandibles up front here, this is where they're carrying their mud. And you'll notice that their stingers back down there. It's you'll see the differences. Typically, a male has long antennas, females a lot shorter, and the males will have a white patch either down here at their chin or up here on their forehead. So it's real easy. The males will be coming out first. They do have a stinger. The pollen that they carry is mostly on their hairy bodies. So when they're actually landing in a flower, they're belly flopping. The pollen's being carried all in this hair versus like a honeybee's keep it on their hind legs. This is the part that has the pollen being spread. Big eyes, antennas, etc. So the life cycle. The bees right now are still probably in cocoon form. They're fully adult bees that are ready to come out and emerge in the spring, typically around 55 or so degrees. So when your dandelion starts showing up, that's about when these bees will show up. They're going to mate. See the longer antennas here and a little white patch? That's the male on the top. They're going to mate. The boys will die pretty soon, about 2 weeks, and then they're gone. And the females are lasting a good 6 or so weeks. So they're out there, the females now, they've collected their sperm from the male. They're out there gathering their pollen, pushing it into holes. That pollen is mixed with a little bit of nectar. She backs in, lays an egg, about a grain of sand or a grain of rice, and then we'll seal that chamber with mud. Okay, so this is a mud or clayey mud using bee. There are bees out there that different species will use tree resin or chewed up leaf bits, or there's a variety of nesting material, but the ones we're talking about today specifically are the mud usings. Once they've laid their eggs all through their chambers, they've sealed it with mud. Typically at the tail end, there's a thick mud plug, and then maybe typically an empty chamber there. So those eggs have all been laid, and slowly but surely the eggs are going to hatch. They're going to consume all of that pollen in there. As they're going, you'll see also black stuff. When you do look at cocoons later on, you're going to find little black pellets all over. That's the poop, mason bee poop, that the larva, as it's going, is pooping, and then when it spins its cocoon, pushes the frass outside of the cocoon body. And so this is happening all through May and into June, and then by July they're starting to spin a cocoon, and then through August, September they're metamorphosing into an adult bee. And finally, by late September, early October, kind of depends where you're at in the country, these bees are now a fully adult bee with a shiny surface, and the hair is all there. And then they just hibernate. They've got their fats that they were stored with all in their abdomen, and they just survive on that stored fats through the winter, ready for spring. And what pulls the bees out is their stored fats are typically about now, February, March, April, are depleted down to maybe like a 10%, 15, 20%, right around there. And when it's warm, those two little pieces of less fuel in their bodies and that warmth has them know that's the time for them to leave. So off they go. Oh, kind of repeating this again, just to make sure we understand it. They're typically coming around 50 degrees, 10 degrees centigrade. Males are first. They're off doing their part, and then he's just out there finding the right size hole. They're typically looking, these bees are typically looking for a 5/16 inch and 8 millimeter hole. There are other bees out there smaller that look for 4 millimeter holes, 1/8 inch holes. And there's a variety of bees out there. So here's just a kind of closer in of what the larvae look like. There's their frass. And here's how they come loaded in. This is the mud, and that is the pollen all over her body. Just it falls off everywhere. You can see it kind of staining the front end of each nesting hole. And then just the progression of here's an egg into small little larva, bigger larva, and then finally starting to do their cocoon spinning, and off they go. There are some people, as they've harvested their cocoons, they find these large larvae still in the cocoons, or I'm sorry, inside their reeds or nesting trays. And really what that says is, no, it's not a bee that forgot to cocoon and make its, develop. It's a summer bee, or it could be a summer wasp, and it needs the heat of the summer to actually metamorphose. So sometimes when you're in the winter and you find grubs, this is a summer insect. So don't throw it away. Okay, any questions on just life cycle? Any questions there at all?
So we do have one question. Are the bees affected by overnight temperatures? Should we be holding off putting them outside until we are consistently above freezing?
Great question. The mason bees, they've got that stored fat reserve in there. Let's say it was 100% fuel tank back in October. The cooler it is for the bees, the lower their metabolism sits inside their body, and they consume those stored fats slower. So if you kept these in your fridge, they're actually going to be stronger in the spring. If you leave them outside where it's warm and hot, they consume their fats faster and they'd be coming out. I would, on the question of when do you want the bees out, if you kept them in your fridge, you might want your bees to come out early in for a spring or a plum tree, so releasing them about that time, or you're trying to pollinate your apples or your pears, you can hold them in your fridge a little longer and release them later April. So you're kind of, when you're managing these bees, you're able to choose when you want them to come out. Okay.
Dave, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
So we have someone that's brand new to raising bees and they live in Southern California. The weather's been a bit crazy. So they've had 2 weeks ago, it was 94 degrees. The last couple nights, hard freeze warnings. So the weather is just kind of all over the place. So the question is, will this crazy weather affect them? And should they put them out now or wait until the warmer weather is consistent?
Okay, so tough with climate change, especially in California. What a mess. I would look at what you want pollinated and kind of lean on that path. If you've got strawberries going or any fruit trees, I would listen more to the fruit trees, and about that time, let the bees out and let them, let them fend for themselves in this climate that's around it. So I would focus more on what you want pollinated first before the bee. And if you aren't worried about them, I would hold them a little longer, maybe latter March. These spring bees typically do best when the temperatures are in the 50s and 60s. When you start hitting the upper 70s, they slow down, they don't die. But once you hit 80, it's tough for these bees to be pollinating. They're just a cooler temperature bee. So I would think through, if you think you're going to be hitting in the 80s and 90s, release them soon, would be my 2 cents. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit of the major differences between these types of bees, solitary bees that we're playing with, and the industrious honeybee. And so as they're carrying this pollen around their bodies, the mason bees, they're belly flopping in a flower. They're just trying to cram as much pollen as they can on their hairy bodies. Next flower, belly flop, cramming in. That pollen is falling off everywhere. So these are a wonderful pollinating, pollen spreading bee. And now the honeybee it's a whole different insect. They've got a hive. They've got 1,500 eggs laid a day by that queen. So every grain of pollen is needed to head back to feed those, little eggs that are hatching. So they've developed to carry this pollen sticky on their hind legs. Not much falls off. So the honeybee, it's an inadvertent grain that does fall off, but mostly that pollen is being carried on their hind legs and it heads back to the hive. So kind of a pollen spreading and a pollen taking bee. And I'm not saying that's anything wrong with the honeybee. It's just more factual. The other part, as a mason bee, it's just her. She's started her house wherever she's at in an orchard or a yard, and she's just meandering ever and just trying to get the pollen in probably a 30-minute circuit, just bouncing all over everywhere. So as they're cramming that pollen in their bodies, it's falling off everywhere. So they're a great cross-pollinating insect. Whereas a honeybee, because she's got 20,000 of her sisters all scattered in a mile radius, they need to get, they don't want to be on the same tree. So they're going to go own a tree practically. She's gathering the pollen from one tree back to the hive, back to that same tree, and she's going to keep on working on that tree, maybe the neighbor tree, just to get as much pollen as she can until there's no more pollen there. Then she goes back for another assignment. And so they're very focused bee. And between the two species here, you can see why I would never say don't have a honeybee in an orchard, but I would say the and scenario, a big pollen spreading versus a very focused bee, is where we would be recommending why you'd head this path. And you can see, if you're in a yard, you don't necessarily need a honeybee. These mason bees are doing their part. They're typically flying in a 6-acre radius. That's about 300 feet radius. You should see increased all over the place. That's how I started my company years ago. My wife and I had a big apple tree, and we had maybe 2 or 3 apples. And wife went to a friend's house, and they had apple tree loaded with apples. She tells us, well, what did they do? She came back. She goes, they have this thing called a mason bee. Okay. And so within a couple of years, this is 20 some years ago, a couple of years, I drilled holes in blocks of wood. That's kind of how I started out. And within 3 or 4 years, all of a sudden, we had boatloads of apples. And so whether it's apples or cherries, or there's scientific studies, triple the yield in cherries, 1.5 times the yield in strawberry fields. I mean, they're just a phenomenal bee that spreads pollen. Okay. Between the two species, any questions on the capabilities of the mason bee?
I think you're clear to continue.
Yay.
If any questions come up, please feel free to type them. We can always backtrack.
Yep. Okay. When we say pollinators are at risk, the common denominator of this is humans. Just, spoiler alert. In the habitat loss area, these cavity nesting bees used to go into old trees that, big skags are out there, as the trees are falling on the ground or wherever. They're going in, bird pecked holes, they're going underneath the bark. So those trees are typically gone across everywhere. And then even the reeds, people are just making their yards a little more fastidiously clean. So habitat loss is a real thing. Climate change, it's hard, just as that person from California is saying, it's hard for the bees to come out, and because the climate is so different, maybe it's too dry, the pollen that bees used to seeing isn't necessarily there at that specific time. It might be coming out later, or might just not be there at all. So the bees starve. There's a lot of, as they come out, there's too much rain. There's a lot of variety of things that climate change is doing. And the really only answer is the bees are gonna have to just learn to adjust as fast as they can. As we're thinking this through as scientists, we know that the hole nesting bees, the cavity nesting bees, can be moved further north easier than the ground nesting bees, which represents maybe the ground nesting bees are maybe 75% of the bees. It's going to be tough to move them. So that's the one nice thing about where we can possibly help. I don't probably have to say much to this audience, but the chemicals in our yard, the bees are susceptible to chemicals, whether it's directly to the bee, like neonicotinoids impact a bee's memory. They kind of forget where they're going. Or even when you have your ground soaked, whatever you've done with your lawn treatment, the ground nesting bees in there have got their eggs in that same soil that are licking the pollen, or licking the sidewalls of their little holes in the ground, consuming the stuff that we've left behind with them. So pesticide use is a mess. And we'll talk a little bit later on about things you can do. But the reliance that we have on herbicides and lawn treatment and all, we're out there spraying for Zika in the southeast of the United States. Every flying insect dies. When we're spraying for, ticks in the northeast, aerial spraying, we're just killing everything. I mean, it's a mess. And then the introduced diseases, this is an interesting piece that when you take the honeybees from the California almonds, where they're at physically right now, this is the dirtiest pollination event in the world. You've got almost every hive in the United States there. And all of the diseases and viruses are being passed in the flowers. Disease bees go into clean hives, and it's a mess. So you take that mess where these bees aren't that healthy, and you move them across the country. They're now spreading in their 5-mile radiuses wherever these hives are landing. They're passing those diseases they might have picked up from, I don't know, Tennessee into Oregon, or I'm sorry, into California, and now moving up through the Washington belt. It's a mess, and we're causing it. And the awareness of it is, I guess, the first point. To be aware is to know what's going on. We probably can have direct impact with pesticide use in your yard, and you certainly can supply nesting holes in your yard as well. That was a lot said. I'm trying to be nice about it. Sometimes we get frustrated. Any questions there, Kim?
No, there are no additional questions there.
Okay. Mason bees are easy. A honeybee hive, it takes a lot of maintenance. There's a lot of classes you can take. Mason bees, roughly 2 hours a year. And a lot of that, if you're gonna go put your nesting house up and put the holes out there, the bees out, maybe you're gonna walk around your yard thinking where you're gonna do it and put up maybe 15 minutes, I guess. And then putting the bees out is, 2 minutes. I find that in my yard, I waste a lot of hours just watching them go, because it's just so cool watching these go in and out. In the fall, there's a little bit of maintenance. There's a lot of pests that will go in there with them. So in the fall, you're doing a little bit of cleanup. You're opening things up. That takes time. You're washing them. That takes a little bit of time. We try to keep the costs down. So this is a lower cost pollination solution than more of the honeybee. Okay, so here's kind of the how-tos. We're gonna be walking through what type of bees you should be looking for, some of your garden requirements. Where do you put things? How do you put them out? When do you release your bees? Talk a little bit about the pests that you'll be seeing, and then how to manage these in the fall. So this is kind of all the how-to part of things. So first of all, when you're getting bees, be careful. You've got a lot of people across the country that mail bees unopened from Seattle to Pennsylvania. In that unopened hole, there's a lot of pests. There's a lot of diseases that are being passed. When you take a Seattle bee that's I'm going to call it a moderate temperature bee, and you move it into a hotter environment, say Texas or the Southeast, the temperature regimes are very different. And the bees of the Northwest flung to the Southeast, their eggs, the next year's species, bees typically don't survive. So we're careful. I think you should be looking for bees that are sold by a company that's certified by the Orchard Bee Association. Crown Bees helped start this 14 or so years ago. This organization, nonprofit, ensures that what we do predominantly, our cocoons are all loose cocoon. Every cocoon that, if you purchased it from us, has probably been touched by human hand, gosh, we think 7 to 8 times, every single one. And we're talking hundreds of thousands to millions of cocoons, a lot of hand touching. And the bees that we get, we source our Pennsylvania bees from backyard gardens in Pennsylvania. They're back here in Seattle, we clean them up and then sell them back to, put them back into homes in Pennsylvania. So when you're looking for bees, you're looking for bees that are loose cocoon and typically raised around you. It's important enough I'm asking. You don't have any questions on that? There's a lot of crud being passed across the country. Okay.
Not on this specific topic. I've got a couple questions for you, but I know that you'll be discussing them in later slides, so I'll save them till then.
Good, thanks. Okay, must-haves. A clay-using bee, surprisingly, if there's no clay in the yard, it's all sandy, loamy, or dried, dried whatever, or the lawn is all beauty bark and grass and asphalt, this clay-using bee will fly someplace else. Very simple, okay? Same thing if I took a cactus pulp using bee, they're down there in the deserts, okay? And I moved them up to the Great Northwest, that cactus pulp bee would not do well, okay? So the mud using bee, this is a real night and day. If there's not moist, just a rich clay soil in your yard, then go get some. It's real easy. And we're just mixing our dried mud with some water, and you're slapping it on the side wall of a hole, and you're letting the groundwater keep that mud clean, okay? Real simple. We have a mud box if your ground is too porous. So think through the mud source. Free from chemicals and pesticides. I'm gonna stop my sharing for a second and flip screens. I want to show you, Kim just wrote this piece a bit ago. This is our website, Crown Bees. Be knowledgeable. If you look up there and come on down here to Bee Friendly Lawn, this is a great resource. When you're clicking on that, these two pieces in here, if you've got neighbors, this is a real truth. If your neighbor's out there spraying, the downwind plume from your neighbor's yard has your bees flying elsewhere. So these two pieces down here are great little attachments that you can print off and lovingly hand to your neighbor. We're trying to give you some education, or trying to give you a little bit of ammo to help your neighbor maybe, at least while your bees are flying, not spray. That's important to us. Any questions on that one?
Nope.
Okay. So these bees are looking for nesting holes. The species that we sell are looking for about 8 millimeters. This is about 5/16 of an inch. You're looking for holes that can be opened. These are reeds. These are wood trays. These trays come apart. They're just kind of held together by rubber bands or paper tube and inserts. This is the guard tube here, and this insert comes in and out. So this is a consumable. That's a consumable. So you're looking for nesting holes that can be opened up. On the house, you're looking for a house that has overhang. So about maybe 2 inches from the front of the house, maybe to the reeds. You're looking for a landing spot out here. You're looking for, this type of arrangement. And if you can, we've learned that nesting bees early on in the morning are great little snacks for birds. So a bird guard, we think 3/4 of an inch is the right hole opening. 1/4 inch is too small for the bees to get to. So 3/4 inch. So 1/2 inch we think is too small. 1 inch birds can still poke through. So 3/4 of an inch. And it's not made in the US very easily. So we've got a big roll of that we can cut for you. Those things we think are important. One thing you should avoid, drill blocks of wood and bamboo. Bamboo is, you'll find it on a lot of offshore products. They're typically glued in, and you can't open them because they're so structurally sound. And what happens, and we'll get into the pests in a bit, because your pests are inside here with your bees will use these holes first year. The pests are in with them. As the bee leaves next spring, the pests stay behind. And so now a new bee is going to come in and use that same hole that's already has the pests in it. And the eggs next year, next year's bees are using them. They wind up, you get less and less bees every year. So the bamboo, non-openable stuff actually winds up killing more bees over time than had you purchased products that you're managing, able to open up. So really important we believe, to avoid the bamboo drilled blocks path.
Dave, I've got a question for you that pertains to this. Mm-hmm. So someone asked about 3D printed plastic tubes.
We tend to lean into nature. And when we ask what happens with, why, okay, when you put bees into a plastic straw, in nature, the excess moisture that has, it's in the pollen mass, typically is able to disperse wick into the wood or the paper tube or the reeds. So if you can't, and so like a 3D plastic, 3D environment, you get moldy cocoons, and the bees a lot of times will be dying in those. So I would avoid non-natural nesting holes. The house doesn't matter. You can have a beautiful cedar house. You can go with a tin can on its side, recycled bottle. It doesn't matter. But the nesting holes we think should be wicking material. Good question. I appreciate that you asked that.
Yeah. And one more question about our cardboard tubes. Do they need to prepare the cardboard tubes by enclosing one end, or is it already enclosed?
What's the answer, Kim?
They are already enclosed.
Correct. Yeah, we're careful about that. So you do want to have a backing to the end of it. So all our reeds have a natural node back there. Our wood trays are all sealed at the back end. And then, yeah, the bee tubes have all tight enclosures. Do avoid, okay, so here's the insert and then the guard tube. This thickness, there's a parasitic wasp that loves to, really cool insect. They walk along the outside of the surface and they tap with their antennas, tap, 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 tap. And they can hear exactly where the larva is down there. They put their ovipositor, I think I've got a slide of it later on, right through the sidewall of thin inserts. Okay, so this thickness of the bee tube and insert here typically can stop that. But if you don't have that white insert, they can get through a cardboard here. If you only have the insert, it's just like butter. The bee, the wasp gets through. So make sure you team these two things up. And they're really low cost to replace these, and to open these things up we tell you how to do that in the fall. Okay, where are you putting things? You're choosing something sturdy, not swinging in the breeze. We want to have the front of the house facing morning sun, so kind of southeast. You could put it on a west facing hole, but the bees typically don't leave till they're warm enough, and so they're only going to live 6 weeks. And if you limit them to not moving really off until like 11 or 12 in the afternoon, in the morning, your bees are just going to be less productive. You'll get less cocoons. So the earlier they start, the more productive they are. So warm morning. Well, we learned that when you put these over a bird bath, sometimes they're just a bee. They fall off into the water and drown. Okay, so just don't put it over water. Morning sun, and then eye level. You can put them up on a second floor, no big issues there, even like maybe a third floor of an apartment complex. The bees can get up there. But typically we want you watching. They're fun. Put them at head height, or even chest height. And on my porch, they're right underneath chairs, and we sit there and the bees are just flying over us. It's really captivating. They're so gentle, so awesome. Any questions here?
Yeah, I've got one that fits in this category. So do the houses need to be sheltered? She purchased several from us years ago, and the little guys have found new homes in the grove of trees rather than in the houses. So does sheltering the house help mason bees nest there?
Yeah, it's such a tough one. It's such a tough one. You don't have leashes on these bees, and they're going to nest when they really want to. I think if you get cocoons and they start from the house, a lot of them want to they know where they started from. And the pheromone that we've got, it's called Bee, works. It's a patented piece from the USDA. We know that it smells like bees have nested there before, so that kind of helps. And even then, I think you've done all you can, and the bees just nest elsewhere. We know that you've got, let's say you've got two houses that are 50 feet apart, and you perfectly identical houses, and you put all the cocoons in the right-hand house. And the first bee that uses the left-hand house, they all kind of gravitate to the left. So, you might start over here, but they're going to go where everyone else is because they're gregarious. They want to be next to each other. So it's that, it's like, yeah. most of the time people are successful, but not always. I would sense the frustration in that question. Okay, so when are you releasing? Okay, so again, when dandelions, if you're trying to pollinate your cherry trees, watch for dandelions as that clue, or kind of watch where your first bloom pops out. I might make sure if you're going to release their bees, they need to have some pollen source. In the Northwest, it's rhododendrons and heather and Pyrrhus japonica and dandelions. So all those things are kind of come out at that first page. You can wait for as long as you want to, but they've got to be out before the 1st of May. Later than May, you're going to have the bees, the males will come out at 30 degrees in your fridge. The females will just absorb their eggs until they're just dead. So we always kind of say May 1st is the last date that you should have your bees outside. And then be patient. If your bees have been held in the fridge or something, they just might not be ready to come out. So patience. So it might take 3 weeks for the bees to come out, but it's, and one thing I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. If you have been nesting your bees in bamboo or drill blocks, a real cool thing to do is you're gonna get a bee guard bag from us, put your nesting material inside there, okay? Seal this thing up, and what's gonna happen as the bees emerge from the holes during the day, they're gonna be inside your bag. Whenever you want to, walking by in the evenings, just let them out of the bag, and it's a one-way exit. They're not gonna go back in and use these holes. They're gonna go out to the better holes up top. So if you haven't, like let's say you do have bees that you haven't harvested, you can still open up reeds, paper tubes, you can unwind them. Don't do any washing. Just at this late stage, have your bees in something and maybe, transfer this, or, you can still open things up, but this is how to change from, I'm gonna say, bamboo and drill blocks of wood to something better.
One question for you, Dave, on releasing. When is the latest you can release mason bees?
So May 1st would be my 2 cents. Yeah, I'm gonna say May 1st. If you've kept them, I mean, in true scientific sense, we by accident, this is a horrible statement, we lost sight of some bees were in some tube in a back refrigerator in the company, and all the way into November, someone opened the tubes up. It's like, oh crud, here's cocoons, and put them out on the counter, and bees started, 2 or 3 bees started emerging. I mean, there were still bees that, were alive that late date, but we think for best success, May 1st. There are other bees that you can use if you're trying to get summer crops. There are leafcutter bees that are a great solution for warmer temperatures. Okay. Oh, the other part on this good point that Kim brings up here. Let's say that you've got a lot of cocoons, maybe 100 or a couple hundred. You can release them in phases. Put some out, when the first of the season, maybe when your cherry trees are coming out, 2 or 3 weeks later, let some others out. 2 or 3 weeks later, let the other ones out. So as long as they're out by May, but you can extend your, if you start at the very beginning so let's say it takes you 4 to 5 weeks to put your bees out, the latter bees are still going to go for another 6 weeks. So you might get 11 weeks of pollination with your cocoons. So you can store them. When you're putting the cocoons out, avoid having them in direct sun. It's not natural. The bees just bake. So you want to keep them hidden, typically up in an attic or maybe behind your nest materials. We've got our little invention here, so we call it the hatchery, where this is a drawer that comes out, you can put your cocoons in there and the bees will emerge here. Or this is one of our recycled plastic pieces that toss your cocoons in here and they'll come out the hole when they want to. So simple little, you can make your own, but this is a good path so that if you just toss your cocoons out here in the front, it's good bird material. The wind blows them around. So trying to protect them a little bit is advisable. Any questions here, Kim?
Yeah, how about how long does this kind of is just a general question. How long does each female live and pollinate after coming out of its cocoon?
Between 4 to 6 weeks typically is how long they're going to survive. They've got maybe 25 or so eggs in their body, and they'll typically lay at least in one nesting hole. There's probably 6 to 8 cocoons that will be, eggs will be laid inside here. So you'll get maybe, they might do 2 holes, maybe. You might get 12 or so cocoons from, or, bees, the following year from one bee. So they're probably laying an egg a day, maybe every other day. And that takes about 4 to 6 weeks.
And then one more for you. When should leafcutter cocoons be put out? Is it the same time as mason bees?
No. So we will have a presentation on leafcutters later on. A leafcutter, the species that we sell overwinter as larvae, and it takes about 3 or so weeks worth of heating these bees up carefully that they're ready to emerge. And they're a great hot temperature bee. So upper 70s into, gosh, they're down in Palm Desert, my dad's place, at 100 degrees, flying just fine. So this leafcutter is more of a summery bee. If you're out in the Northwest, I wouldn't have them show up until early June, when the temperatures are a lot warmer. So kind of avoid the, I would not overlap the species. Good question. Okay, now we're going to talk a little about gross things that happen inside there. There's a lot that, okay, when you put a lot of good foods in one tight spot, that nature doesn't like this. Nature wants these holes spread far apart. So the optimal bee habitat has holes all throughout your yard, but we humans want them all together in one little tight spot. And so by doing that, diseases are easily spread. This is called Chalkbrook, and this is kind of a gross little, this was once a larva that as it consumed a couple little grains, this is friable. If you were to crush this with your finger, it's going to be like the dust off a mushroom spore or like a butterfly wing. It's really, really fine, okay? And as that just is left on the wall, okay, let's say this is a dead bee, okay? This is a dead larva. Mason bees in the spring are they're just going to pile right past this. It's now all over their bodies. It's all over their hairy bodies. This mass of spore is spread down the holes. It's on the face of the house. It's on the flower. It's everywhere. Okay. And then other mason bees will pick those little spores up, put them in their pollen mass, and it's just accentuates. It just keeps on going. Years ago, before we learned how to tackle this, probably 10% of our bees became just chalkroot spores. So you handle this by opening your stuff up before you put the bees out, and you'll see in there you're just throwing this away. And we've got Clean Bee that cleans that spot in a wood tray. So chalkroot's a gross one. Pollen mites in your yard are mites that eat pollen. That's their job. Okay, and when you bring in pollen with pollen mites in there, and you just kind of stuff this whole pollen mass back there, gosh, what a pile of food. And so there's a lot of times these mites just consume everything and pop the egg that was laid in there, and it's just solid mites. And just, okay, and there's nothing you can do about this other than if you left these bees alone. No, I don't want to do that. If you left the bees inside their nesting holes, those mites in the springtime crawl all over the bee as they're walking through, and these are all tiny mites, all going to piggyback. It's how nature works. Piggyback into the flowers, and they just fall off in the pollen mass out there. So, no harm, no foul. It's how it works. But if you don't do anything, those mites stay back in this nesting hole, and so as the next year's bee brings in more pollen, the mites are already there. And so, within 2 or 3 years, you wind up just solid pollen mites, and the bee might have laid a whole lot of eggs in here, but they never open up because the mites just consumed all the pollen. So it's a nature's way of, if you have too many bees in one spot, that's how nature kind of fights it. Here's this parasitic wasp we talked about a little bit beforehand. She lays her ovipositor, this thing here, right through the side walls of thin tubes. And she lays it right into the, there would be like a mason bee larva was in here. It spun its cocoon. So here's mason bee did his whole thing, and she spun her cocoon, and she's sitting there as a huge big larva. And along comes this parasitic wasp. That's her job. She pokes right through thin walled something, lays her eggs inside her, right into the larva. Okay. And as that larva finally, it's like aliens, burst from the inside, all these, parasitic wasps consume the larva, and then they'll leave. They just chew a little hole right through the side wall, and off they go. So how to avoid this is to have thicker holes. We have a pest guard on the back of our wood trays that we added a couple of years ago that stops this. So we think we've figured this pest out, but it's there. And this last one is just frustrating. This is the Houdini Fly. 4.5 years ago, in the Northwest, we found something looked like this in our holes. Like I said, what's that? And then the following year, we're raising these bees all across the Northwest. The following year, there was like a lot of what's this? And the third year, I took this out to my Orchard Bee Association, and I had some Swiss colleagues that looked at that and said, "Oh my gosh, Dave, you've got our biggest pest. It's from Europe. It's called the Houdini Fly." It's like, what's it do? And this stupid thing, it's a small little fruit fly. It's a real small thing. It looks just like this. Sits on the outside of the hole. It's a kleptoparasite is the word, okay? It waits till the bee goes in there, puts all its pollen mass, and when the bee's gone, it just runs in there and lays an egg or two. And it comes back out, sits on the outside, the bee goes in there again, it just sits there and lays its egg everywhere. So these eggs hatch, become little maggots, and they consume all of the pollen, and they're stuck in the chamber, and they stay as a maggot all the way through the fall, all the way in the winter, and about now as it's starting to warm up, now they metamorphose into a fly. And why do we call it the Houdini Fly? It's really kind of cool. The juvenile stage, this is an adult. Okay, here's the egg or the larva, and as it almost is an adult bee without any wings, it crams. A juvenile will push its head into the mud wall, and finds a little crevice and swells its head like a little hydraulic hammer, or hydraulic hammer, and the head swells, and a little mud chips out. It moves forward, and so it can break through the mud wall. And once it gets through, then all the flies behind it, are now able to escape out that hole. Thus, the Houdini name. It's a really cool fly. We're trying to solve this. We have we'll bring that up in email. I think in our next version of this. It's nasty, and this was only in Seattle. Now it's all up in British Columbia. It's now in Pennsylvania, New York, because people from the West Coast are mailing their unopened tubes to the East Coast and spreading this pest everywhere. And it's just is. Okay, that's pests. I said a lot.
I will say I put 2 links in the chat for helping you identify and managing pests and diseases, because I know it's a lot to take in. So there's one to help you. It's like a visual guide to help you identify what might be in your nest. And then the second is what you can do about the various types of pests and diseases for mason bees. And then I don't have another question about pests, but I do have a question about clay. So we're just going to back up a bit. Mm-hmm. We've got a question from someone living in Southern California with the Santa Ana winds. It's very dry. What's the best way to ensure that the clay and mud does not dry out? And is it better to keep it in a shady area? Just kind of what do you do with the clay in very hot, dry areas?
Okay, we invented this little product called the mud box that essentially capillary action. So if your ground is too porous and too hot, this is a little simple device that you've got water down here, capillary cloth pulls the moisture out here, and your mud stays here, typically moist. I would lean on this. Your mud source should be not right underneath the nesting house, but maybe 15 feet away, a little tip. And so I would keep that same thing. I would keep your mud box a distance away and probably more shaded. I put hot lamps, heat lamps on this for a while, and this water source kept the mud going for about maybe 7 days before I had to put the water back in. So it's a simple, we're real cheap. It's a simple solution here. Good question. Okay, this is simple. I'm not going to get into it much. There's all these gross little pests that are in there. If you want to manage bees and you want to kind of have your populations increase, you're opening them up. It's quite easy. So all of our reeds are opened up. Let me just grab one to show you exactly what I mean. We think the bees prefer reeds over anything else. I'm going to just stop sharing for a second. Okay, so here's a reed that's filled. I'm just cracking this with my finger and then getting mud all over my keyboard. Just open it up. And now I've got inside here cocoons. It's that easy. So I'm just able to separate pests from, open them up this way. So this is a good means of, this is what you're doing when you're harvesting. You're exposing the cocoons. We'll tell you how to do this in the fall. We've got a lot of videos. So this is more of a fall operation. You're washing things, you're storing them in fridge. We think fridge is a good place to do it, just because it's you're able to keep the metabolism low and keep your bees healthier longer. Scientifically, your bees will last better if you kind of do this. I know this isn't quite natural, but with our kind of messing ecology that we're doing out here, this is maybe not a bad thing. So that's how to take care of them. So we'll get in that ball. So programs, just kind of simple things to round it out. We're trying to source bees. We're trying to help people across the country get bees. And so if you have too many cocoons, which a lot of people are really successful, have tens and hundreds and thousands of bees, they just sell them back to us. We give them store credit or cash or something like that. We clean them. We get rid of all the pests. The cocoons are sorted. We have bins that have whatever region they're from. And then we make sure that those bees head back to their same region. So we're very careful. We care. So this is the bee buyback program that you can actually even go online, and it's programs. And it's just go in here to bee buyback and put your name down there. We'll reach out to you, give you a couple extra tips. There's a little form to fill up on that piece. Community gardens. This is another, Kim runs this. This is designed to help community gardens, pea patches, school gardens, Audubons, all these different places. When you're using these bees, everyone gets more food. So we've got good discounts. We help people teach and say what to their organizations, and we're helping. This is as best we can, and you'll find this whole program under this whole thing, Community Gardens, is a great resource to go touch. This is a really wonderful piece. Kim and I and some teammates out at Cornell Museum of Earth built this wonderful curricula that is Cornell-based, really good scientific piece that teaches all sorts of curricula for high school, pretty much. Bee anatomy, life cycles, just some really neat courses that inside here's the curricula, activities, resources. It's really neat. We're very proud to host that on our website. This is a cool program. And then last little piece that we're touching, this is, we're not quite there yet. We realize it's bigger than we thought. There's close to 1,000 different species of solitary hole nesting bees across the country. Right now, we're only really touching one of them, the blue orchard mason bee. What about the other 1,000 that are out there? Can we find them before they're gone, bring them into centers across the country, working with universities to learn what's going on, how to make these things better, grow an awful lot of them, and then push them back to where they belong before they're gone. So this is it's our own little thought bubble. We're trying to think through funding. It's going to cost us millions of dollars to do, and we're not that big of a company, but we think it's the right thing to do for not just here, but the world before the bees are gone. So that's what that means. It's important. It's yeah, we're working on it. So in our website, so just the Be Knowledgeable, it is right here. Everything you really want is at your, what type of bees are you playing with? It's all right here. Once you're inside to, your mason bees, there's all sorts of little pieces here to learn, beginner's guides, everything you want is really here. How we ship them, picking your mason bee date, it's all there. It's really good stuff. We've enjoyed, this was all last summer rewriting this. It was wonderful to write. And this little piece down here, that little leaf right there, and this help center here, if you have a question, Kylie, who's on with us today, is responsible. She's a customer service guru, and her team answers questions. We can help you all sorts of things. So this is a piece for anyone to learn more. We want you successful. Well, there you go. Any questions? Pass that.
We have one question. Are the cocoons fragile? This is a fun one to answer.
No, they're not fragile. They're a very robust little cocoon that you can drop on the ground. I mean, it's a bug. Okay, they're fragile when they're just spinning the cocoon out there in the June, July type thing, and by the time about now the cocoon shell is very friable. It's so the bees can cut it as they come out with their little mandibles. So they need to cut through a papery something. Very, very durable. They float in water. It's so when in the fall, that's why you're dropping in water. They're just waterproof, and it's a cool house that these little bees live in. Is that it?
That is. Oh no. If I have a neighbor close with honeybee hives, will my mason bees play nice with the neighbor's honeybees? Any problems with close proximity? That's a good question too.
That's a great question. In the real world, bees are kind of all vegetarians, kumbaya, okay? So what we've learned, actually, in a hive, there's this thing called a waggle dance where the bees, in a honeybee hive, the angle of the dance matches the declination of the sun. The length of the dance, matches how far to go for that pollen as these bees are communicating. Okay, there's no dance tight enough for 400 feet. Okay, and so in that umbrella, that's about 8 acres, about 10 acres. That hive right there typically doesn't have purposeful pollination by the honeybee hive. So in that umbrella, mason bees are perfect. Okay. So I think the best, if you were a honeybee keeper, the best place to put your hive for your yard would be a couple blocks, city blocks over, So, and they get along. What we've also learned in an orchard, typically a honeybee only orchard, the bees are methodically grabbing everything. Once they see someone else coming in there, it's like, oh man. And they start, the honey becomes a little more agitated and will bounce between trees. And so interjecting other bees actually has them more cross-pollination going on. So an and situation is good when you're playing in an orchard.
Okay, is there a place to sign up on the website for notification of future webinars so I don't miss them? That's a good question.
What's the answer?
I would say sign up for our bee mail. We will definitely post any upcoming webinars. We'll send you a notification through our bee mail. Plus, then you get all of the tips and tricks seasonal to help remind you what you need to be doing when for both mason bee and leafcutter bees. And then you can also follow us on social media because we do all of our posting there as well. So any of those you will definitely be notified.
I would add one more thing, and that is make sure you're sharing information that you're getting from Dave and the website, et cetera, with your friends and fellow gardeners, because obviously this is a big community effort. We want to get the word out as much as we possibly can. And so Dave is clearly happy to share all of his knowledge, and we all get to benefit. So make sure that you're telling your friends and family and everybody around you, because again, the pesticide issue is a huge one we're all trying to work on. And we'll also be coordinating on upcoming seminars, webinars, et cetera, so that we can help out in helping Dave and the crew get the word out.
And this is recorded. We're gonna we'll have a link. Where would we put this? In our YouTube account? I know that.
Yeah, we'll be posting the entire webinar on our YouTube account, so you'll be able to access it there. I will double check to make, we had a question about sending all the